When Beijing threatens to curb rare earth exports, the world listens. Because it's more than a trade move, it's a warning shot. These aren't just metals buried in the ground. They are the hidden force behind electric cars, wind turbines, smartphones, and even fighter jets. Without them, modern industry stops. For years, China quietly built a supply chain so deep and efficient that no other nation can match it. The world's factories depend on that network to stay running, and one policy shift in Beijing can send shockwaves through energy and tech markets overnight. Now, as Washington answers with tariffs and new restrictions, the confrontation is moving far beyond trade. It's turning into an industrial power struggle, a test of who controls the materials of the future, and whether America's economic model can survive a fight it wasn't designed for. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and share this video with anyone who follows global markets. It really helps us keep going. Now, let's jump in. Many still believe China's power comes from controlling rare earth mines, but that time has long passed. Over the last decade, China's share of mining fell from 99% in 2010 to about 60% in 2019, and it now hovers near 68%. Countries like the United States, Australia, and even Thailand now extract their own rare earth minerals. But the real question is, what to do with all these raw materials? To make them usable, they have to be refined. And that's where China becomes truly irreplaceable. Beijing still handles around 90 to 95% of the world's refining capacity. Nearly every electric car motor, smartphone, and missile guidance system still depends on Chinese plants to transform raw ore into powerful magnets and alloys. Building those facilities elsewhere is almost impossible. Refining rare earths requires huge amounts of cheap energy, massive water use, and acceptance of toxic waste, conditions Western countries can't easily allow. The result is a cost gap that no private company wants to bear. Australia's Lynas, for example, is trying to open a refining plant in Texas with US support, but the costs have already ballooned to nearly $800 million, and investors remain uncertain. Similar projects in Canada and Europe are stalled for the same reasons: sky-high expenses and endless environmental reviews. So while the world may mine rare earths from different soils, nearly all of them still travel the same route, to China. That's where they are refined, processed, and shipped back to the very countries trying to cut dependence. And that's where Beijing's quiet advantage begins to tighten, turning a resource story into an economic weapon that the West still struggles to counter. But in Washington, the tone couldn't be more different. President Trump insists that tariffs have placed America in a position of strength.
And we are in a very strong position because of tariffs. We're in a very powerful position because of the fact that we have tariffs. If we didn't have tariffs, we would be in a very weak position. We would be in a weakened state. But with tariffs, we've made hundreds of billions of dollars, not only from China, but from others. And China wants to talk, and we like talking to China. So we have a very good relationship, and we're going to be meeting in South Korea in a couple of weeks.
Washington's trade war has reached a point where every move backfires. Trump's team faces an impossible choice: keep tariffs on Chinese goods and watch prices climb, or subsidize local refining and deepen America's deficit. Either path is costly, and while politicians argue over policy, China has already made its move. Officially, Beijing's new export restrictions haven't even started, yet the impact is visible. In just 1 month, rare earth exports slipped from 7,300 tons in August to about 6,500 in September, a drop of more than 10%. Most analysts believe that reduction came straight from shipments to the United States. Beijing's message is clear. It doesn't need loud threats to cause pain. A quiet slowdown is enough to send shockwaves through US supply chains. Every ton of missing material means delayed chip production, slower EV assembly, and rising prices for the industries Trump promised to protect. For China, this is leverage through patience, and it's working. Scott Bessent, one of Trump's key economic allies, has already called China's move a breakdown of global trade. But that accusation rings hollow. The breakdown began years ago when Washington launched sweeping tariffs and chip bans that cornered its own companies. Now Beijing is simply responding in kind. This tension is building ahead of the upcoming Trump-Xi meeting, which both sides quietly describe as a high-stakes standoff. Investors know what's at risk. The US imports over $800 million worth of rare earth compounds each year, and even a small disruption can ripple through aerospace, defense, and tech manufacturing. For Beijing, this early squeeze isn't a declaration of war, it's a test. It's showing Washington how fragile its industrial base has become. And while the US scrambles for alternatives, the clock is ticking because every month of limited supply deepens America's dependence. That's when the real consequences start to unfold. If China fully cuts off rare earth exports, the shock would hit every corner of the American economy. These elements, curium, samarium, neodymium, and dozens more, are the invisible foundation of modern life. They power electric vehicles, wind turbines, fighter jets, and iPhones. China controls between 80 and 95% of the global supply, and even a small reduction ripples across entire industries. Without steady access, US factories would face soaring prices or outright production halts. Building a single electric car can require up to 5 kilograms of rare earth magnets. Wind turbines need hundreds. Even importing from friendly countries like Australia or Vietnam wouldn't solve the problem. Refining there is limited, and US tariffs would raise costs by another 10 to 20%. The challenge isn't just about supply, it's about knowledge. Refining rare earths involves more than 100 complex chemical steps, each adapted to the geology of where the minerals are mined. What works in China's ore fields doesn't necessarily work in American ones. Over decades, Chinese engineers perfected these processes. And now, Beijing has banned the export of key refining equipment and restricted experts from working abroad without approval. In other words, even if Washington mines every rare earth deposit it can find, the materials would still need to pass through China for processing. That's the choke point Beijing has built and is now quietly defending. As US policymakers talk about decoupling, they're discovering that the global economy is welded together far tighter than expected. And with every new restriction from Beijing, the pressure inside America's clean energy and tech sectors continues to build, setting the stage for the next major shock. Washington is now betting on new mining projects to close the gap. Around 22 rare earth initiatives worldwide, most of them in the US, Canada, and Australia, aim to be operational by 2030, but analysts warn that few will reach full production. Financing is uncertain, costs are rising, and China can still undercut prices whenever it chooses. Each new project looks promising on paper, yet none can challenge Beijing's refining dominance for at least another decade. And as those deadlines stretch further away, the next shockwave is already forming in another arena: the race for advanced chips. While Washington struggles to contain the rare earth crisis, another front is already heating up: the battle for advanced chips. America's restrictions on semiconductor sales to China have backfired in ways few expected. Nvidia, once the biggest supplier of AI chips to Chinese firms, is now effectively locked out of the world's fastest-growing market. CEO Jensen Huang has admitted that the company is assuming zero market share in China, and he's made no secret of his frustration with US policymakers.
At the moment, we are 100% out of China. And so China is 0% we went from 95% market share to 0%. I can't imagine any policymaker thinking that that's a good idea. That whatever policy we implemented caused America to lose one of the largest markets in the world to 0%. But anyhow, in all of our forecasts, if there are any shareholders out there, all of our forecasts, we're assuming zero for China. If anything happens in China, which I hope it will, it'll be a bonus. But it's a large market. China is the second largest computer market in the world. It is a vibrant ecosystem. I think it's a mistake for the United States to not participate.
China, meanwhile, is accelerating its own race. Huawei has quietly become the centerpiece of Beijing's tech push. In 2025, it produced around 300,000 of its Ascent 910 AI chips and plans to double that to 600,000 next year, with mass output expected to reach millions by 2026. Every chip sold inside China strengthens local innovation, and every restriction from Washington pushes Chinese firms to rely less on US technology. Adding pressure, Beijing is preparing new export licensing rules that could reshape the global chip trade. Companies such as TSMC, SK Hynix, and Samsung may soon need Chinese approval before selling advanced processors to American buyers. That's a major risk since Taiwan's TSMC, the world's leading foundry, still depends on rare earth materials and processing equipment sourced from China. This circular trap is what keeps US planners awake at night. America can design chips, but many of their raw ingredients still flow from China's industrial system. If that supply is disrupted, even the best engineers in Silicon Valley can't finish the job. As Beijing ramps up domestic output and Washington doubles down on sanctions, the lines between the rare earth war and the chip war are beginning to blur. Together, they form a single contest: control over the materials and machines that power the modern world. Faced with a collapsing supply chain and growing panic among manufacturers, Washington is rolling out a plan that looks more like state control than free market capitalism. Scott Bessent, one of Trump's top economic strategists, has proposed a sweeping system of price floors and forward buying across key industries, from mining to advanced materials, to combat China's unfair advantage. In practice, it means the US government would guarantee minimum prices for producers and directly subsidize strategic sectors using taxpayer money. Bessent argues that when facing a non-market economy like China, America must adopt its own version of industrial policy. The plan also includes forming a strategic mineral reserve, where Washington would purchase and stockpile critical resources like rare earths, lithium, and graphite, much like the oil reserves of the past. Official estimates suggest the first phase alone could cost over $40 billion, with more spending expected as new supply chains come online. But these moves carry enormous risks. Artificially high prices discourage buyers while encouraging excess production, creating a glut that the government itself must absorb. Eventually, taxpayers end up footing the bill for unsold materials. It also opens the door to favoritism. Who decides which companies get to sell at guaranteed prices and which are left behind? For a nation built on free enterprise, the optics are stark. Critics warn this could distort entire markets and deepen inflation. Supporters claim it's the only way to rebuild America's industrial base before China's dominance becomes permanent. Either way, the irony is hard to miss. The United States, once the champion of open competition, is now setting prices by decree, propping up industries through subsidies, and rationing resources through government control. In trying to outplay Beijing, Washington is starting to resemble it more and more. For decades, America's greatest strength was its belief in free markets, the idea that competition drives innovation and efficiency. But that belief is now being tested. As Washington moves to fix prices and subsidize key industries, the line between capitalism and central planning is beginning to blur. Trump's administration calls it strategic policy. Critics call it panic. Bessent's price floors and industrial bailouts mark a historic shift. The US government isn't just regulating, it's steering production, setting targets, and deciding which companies survive. Economists warn that once governments start managing prices, it's almost impossible to stop. The same playbook used to counter Beijing's command economy could quietly turn America into a managed one. This reversal comes with heavy costs. Inflationary pressure is already visible, and budget forecasts show federal deficits pushing toward $2.5 trillion for 2026. Investors are uneasy. Wall Street, once confident in America's self-correcting market system, now sees Washington picking winners and losers. The irony couldn't be sharper. To defend capitalism, the US is borrowing the tactics of the very system it once opposed. It's a strategy born of desperation, not design. And while the government tries to stabilize markets, its policies are shaking global confidence instead. America's economic compass is spinning, and the country that built the world's free market order now finds itself sailing through uncertainty, guided less by principle and more by survival. The rare earth battle has grown far beyond trade. It's the dawn of a new industrial Cold War, where China tightens its grip and Washington rewrites its own economic rules just to stay in the game. So, can the US rebuild before the system cracks? Let me know what you think in the comments. Stay tuned and don't forget to like and subscribe as we navigate these crazy times.